You may have asked yourself, what's all this talk about OSHA's laboratory standard on working with hazardous chemicals? And what does it have to do with me? Well, the laboratory standard has been designed to make sure lab workers are informed about potential chemical hazards they may encounter in the workplace, as well as what can be done to protect themselves from such hazards. Now, some of you may be thinking, I don't work around hazardous substances. Well, think about a bottle of disinfectant, cleanser, or reagent. The disinfectants you use on your equipment, or any number of chemicals with which you frequently come into contact, might be hazardous according to laws in effect today. Recently, OSHA instituted the laboratory standard in order to address employees' exposure to hazardous chemicals in laboratories. That's where you come into the picture. The laboratory standard has been instituted for your benefit. It is important to ensure that your workplace is and always will be safe. After viewing this program, you should have a better understanding of the potentially hazardous substances that may be in your workplace, why they're hazardous, how you can work with them safely, and how your facility is working to ensure your health and safety. The intent of the laboratory standard is to provide you with the information you'll need regarding potentially hazardous substances which you may be exposed to in the workplace. In addition to showing you this program, there are a number of other things your employer will be doing to provide you with information about the laboratory standard and how to work safely with chemicals in your laboratory. They'll make a copy of the standard available to you so that you can become familiar with its contents. They will also be creating a chemical hygiene plan, which will describe what your employer is doing to protect you from exposure to hazardous chemicals, as well as the operating procedures you should use when working with these chemicals. And they will let you know where you can find reference materials, such as material safety data sheets, MSDSs, which will further explain the hazards associated with chemicals you work with, as well as how to handle them safely. While there are a number of reference materials you can consult to learn more about the chemicals you work with, the MSDS is one of the most important. The MSDS will not only describe the chemical's hazards, but will provide essential information on how to detect the presence of the chemical and what signs and symptoms you can look for to indicate that you've been exposed to the chemical. MSDSs should be provided by chemical manufacturers and suppliers to document health and safety information about each chemical or material. Laboratories that use these materials should maintain MSDSs for all hazardous chemicals involved in their operations. If a chemical has more than one brand name, the MSDS will give you that information. It also addresses questions such as, what does the chemical smell like? Will it burn? What will happen if it contacts the skin or gets in your eyes? How about long-term health effects of exposure to the substance? Does it react with other elements? What do you do if a spill or leak occurs? What kind of protection information or special precautions are necessary? On the basis of the information contained on the MSDS, each chemical should be evaluated to determine its relative safety and health hazard. It is important that you take advantage of having this data available to you. Workers should have ready access to this information whenever a question regarding chemical properties needs to be answered at your work site. And always remember that providing a copy of a material safety data sheet to emergency medical personnel at an accident scene could save a life.
Hundreds of chemicals are used in the laboratory. Acids, bases, and alkalis. Reagents, catalysts, and neutralizers. Solvents, cleansers, and disinfectants. Even though we generally use these chemicals in small amounts, we must remember that many of them can still be hazardous to our health or safety. And because most labs make use of a large variety of chemicals, we can face a variety of potential hazards. As you know, OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard helps ensure that we get the information and training needed to work safely with hazardous chemicals. OSHA's laboratory standard goes one step further by requiring employers to maintain a chemical hygiene plan. This written program identifies the procedures and equipment that are used to protect employees from hazardous chemicals. For the purposes of the laboratory standard, a hazardous chemical is a substance that has the potential to cause negative health effects. The effect a chemical has on the body depends on the type of health hazard it presents. There are 5 basic categories: sensitizers, irritants, corrosives, toxic chemicals, and carcinogens. After repeated exposures to a sensitizer, many people develop an allergic skin reaction, such as a mild rash. A single exposure to an irritant may cause inflammation of the skin, eyes, or respiratory system. These effects are usually temporary. On the other hand, a corrosive can cause irreversible damage in the form of severe burns. A toxic chemical has the potential to disrupt bodily functions, such as breathing or blood circulation. Some toxic chemicals have target organ effects, which means they damage specific organs, such as the lungs, kidneys, or liver. A poison is an extremely toxic substance that can cause death in a short period of time, even in a very small dose. And finally, a carcinogen, as you know, is a substance that can cause cancer. All chemicals need to be handled with care, but hazardous chemicals demand an extra degree of caution. The protective measures we take depend on the hazards of the material. There are several sources of hazard information in your lab. Remember to read the container label before working with any chemical. This label identifies the chemical, its primary hazards, and any required safety precautions. Anytime you transfer a chemical to another container, you must label that container as well, so everyone will know what's inside. Your facility probably has a standardized labeling system for these secondary containers. As you know, the Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS, provides more detailed information about the chemical than the container label. Your lab maintains an MSDS for every chemical in your facility. Remember to read the MSDS before you work with an unfamiliar chemical. This will help you prevent problems. Review MSDSs from time to time while you work as well, to make sure you're using the chemical safely. Your facility's chemical hygiene plan is another important resource for hazard information. This written program outlines the standard operating procedures you should follow when working with hazardous chemicals. The chemical hygiene plan also covers the selection, use, and maintenance of personal protective equipment for the specific work you do. A training schedule and other details of your facility's chemical safety training program will be included as well. Your lab's chemical hygiene officer, safety director, and your area supervisor are also important sources of information. If you have a question, just ask.
Here are all our safety procedures.
Once we've used these resources to identify the hazards a chemical presents, we need to take steps to protect ourselves. The first step is to wear the appropriate personal protective equipment. Safety glasses are usually the minimum requirement for eye protection in the laboratory. Work involving corrosive liquids or other splash hazards may require goggles or the addition of a face shield. Surgical gloves and other gloves made of rubber protect your hands from most contact hazards. Make sure to use the right gloves for the job. Insulated gloves are needed when working with very hot or very cold materials. Respiratory protection in the lab ranges from the simple filter mask to the air-purifying cartridge respirator to the self-contained breathing apparatus. No matter what kind of respirator you use, you must be tested for a proper